How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I was born ready to talk about this movie. I was actually not born ready to pronounce all of the names that we're going to have to.
I was going to say, this is going to be fun.
I'm going to offend our entire Swedish audience during this. I'm going to do my best. I looked up, I did look up some like pronunciations. I don't know if they're correct,
nice.
But I tried.
Yeah.
I tried.
A quick question, more on the technical side. How are our numbers in Sweden?
We actually, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know we do have listeners in Sweden. I couldn't say off the top of my head how many, but I know that we do get some people in Sweden listening to the show. So yes, so feel free.
Would you say we have a captive audience?
No, you would.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I would.
You would.
I don't even think I get what you're saying.
Stockholm, Sweden.
Oh, yeah.
Captive audience. Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
A lot of layers to that. A lot of layers to that joke.
And now that I've explained it, it's really funny.
Honestly, the best jokes are the ones that need explanation, I think, right? Yeah, that's yeah. I think I read that in a book somewhere about how to do comedy. It was called Comedy for Idiots.
Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock, the comedy podcast exploring the stories. It's not a comedy podcast.
Yeah, no. Is this not a comedy that we're talking about today?
It's kind of funny.
I guess. It's what are we? Oh, we're the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. This is the last podcast you'll ever need about Let the Right One In. And I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horde.
Hey, I'm Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you for joining us for this very special roulette episode.
Just a little peek behind the curtain. This is the first time we've recorded a regular episode together in over a month, I think, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
We recorded a bonus episode that's not out yet, but yeah, it's been a minute.
Oof, yeah.
We've had some setbacks, some acts of God have set us back.
These three idiots keep talking about movies. I'll put a stop to that.
I think if he wanted to stop us, he could have tried.
Yeah. Also, there are more like concise ways to do it than to destroy, an entire multi-state region.
Have you seen the Bible? Because
I was gonna say
he'll fuck up crowds.
But we all came out like people. We all came out relatively unscathed. So
yeah.
And if you see him
the Lord fucks shit up in mysterious ways, fellas.
I think that's in the Bible.
Yeah, it's phrased. It's a older translation, but yes.
Yeah. So it has been a while since we've done one of these roulette episodes, though. So if you are new to the show, maybe you hopped on during the David Lynch series. I know we had some new listeners that hopped on because of that. You may not have heard one of these roulette episodes. So here's how these things work. Every now and then, and this usually takes place kind of in between some of our longer multi-episode series, like the David Lynch series that we just finished. In between some of these series, we will choose some random movie to do an episode on, something that doesn't really fit in with all of our other, it's not by a director we want to cover. It's not in a series we want to cover, but it's a movie that we feel like is worth talking about. Yep. And so we spin our roulette wheel, which is just filled with hundreds of movies, and whichever one it lands on, like we legitimately like pull this completely at random.
Yeah,
we really do. I mean, I know obviously when you're doing a podcast, there are ways to manipulate that, but we genuinely are just pulling these movies at random from a curated list. But still, it's a list of movies that is at this point probably 150, 200 movies long. Like there's a lot of them on there. So when we spin that wheel, like there is a 1 in like 200 chance that it's going to land on one particular movie, and a lot of those movies they're just movies that, when we add them to the list, we'll give each other suggestions like, hey, this should go on the roulette wheel because this would be fun to talk about one day. And they're all movies that we think are worth talking about. Like there's lots of fun, like dumb horror movies or sci-fi movies or whatever that would be fun to watch. But like we try to put stuff on the list that we think would possibly have a good story behind them. Sometimes we'll spin the wheel, we'll land on something and then start researching it and go like, oh, we fucked up. Like there is nothing, there's nothing out there about this, so we do our best. So sometimes the roulette episodes can be shorter than our normal episode. I don't know if that's going to be the case. It'll be shorter than like our David Lynch episodes. Don't worry about that. Those David Lynch episodes were intense. But so the movie we're talking about today's roulette entry, it's one that I've been really wanting to talk about for a long time. It's a Swedish romantic horror film set in the suburbs of Stockholm in the early 1980s, and a movie that is, in my opinion, one of the greatest vampire movies ever made. Today, we are discussing Tomas Alfredson's Let the Right One In.
Hade du tyckt om mig ändå? Vill du bli ihop med mig?
While this episode may be steeped in merriment and friendship, we will not be shutting up when it comes to the details of today's movie. So, if you listen beyond this point, just know you let us in.
When I think about this movie, Todd, I do think of merriment. I really
listen. If there's one thing that you could say about Cinema Shock as a whole is that it is steeped in merriment and friendship.
Well, yeah, Cinema Shock, but not the movie itself. We are.
Oh well, I mean, yeah. Sorry, I turned into Beetlejuice there for a second.
You did.
Yeah, sure.
Michael Keaton's here, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah.
I love that you do the teeth too. That's good.
Yeah.
I can only see that on Cinema Shock Plus though.
Yep.
Premium content.
Not the worst Beetlejuice impression that I've heard.
I need to get that register a little bit lower, but
it'll take some practice, but it is the worst one I've heard today. So, it's also the best one I've heard today. So that's a glass half full, glass half empty situation there. So before we move on, real quick, we want to welcome a new member to Cinema Shock Plus. Nathan Kelley is now an associate producer on Cinema Shock and a member of Cinema Shock Plus. So Nathan, as all of our Cinema Shock Plus subscribers, will be receiving access to all of our extended episodes of Cinema Shock, which started back at the beginning of the David Lynch series. So we're like 7 or 8 episodes in with where we have extended episodes that have all kinds of bonus content, like our further viewing, where we give suggestions of movies to pair with whatever movie we're talking about that week, and our Somebody Needs a Nap, where Gary goes and like reads a bunch of weirdos on the internet who are reviewing the movies that we're talking about that week. We get into all that stuff. Occasionally we'll have Todd's little Star Trek corner when appropriate. I don't know that that's going to happen this week, but Todd might surprise me. But anything that we feel like is fun bonus content that we might make the regular episode a little bit longer than the casual listener might want. Like they're long enough already, right? Let's give you guys some additional content. But usually they have like 30 to 45 minutes of additional content on them, so it's pretty cool. Cinema Shock Plus members also get access, if you're on the highest level, to our video episodes, which is basically our recording session, raw, uncut. I call it bigger, longer, and uncut. And I hope I don't get sued by Trey and Matt. They don't seem like the kind. They seem like an anti-litigation type. I mean, because they've probably been sued 1,000 times, to be honest.
Right.
But yeah, so basically it's like the footage of what we're doing right now, us recording without all the bells and whistles and without all the fuck ups getting edited out. So, which so you'll get a little peek behind the curtain by joining that. So if you want to join Cinema Shock Plus, or maybe you don't care about the bonus content, you just want to join at the little $3 tier, we'll still give you a shout out on the show. Maybe you just want to support the show but don't have time for an extra 45 minutes of content every episode. I get that, but sometimes people just want to throw us a few bucks because they enjoy what we do, and we really appreciate that. So head to cinemashock.net/plus. And you can join right there. You can also find all of our merch, and you get merch discounts if you're a member and all kinds of stuff. So
nice. Thank you, Nathan Kelley.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan.
And behold what your support hath wrought.
That's so threatening.
Yeah.
All right. So Let the Right One In began its life as a novel written by a guy named John Ajvide Lindqvist. And I did look up how to pronounce that one. So
I was going to say that was very well done.
I actually found a video of him introducing himself, and he said in the video, he even said, "I'm probably the only one in this room who can pronounce that." And he was, because he was talking, he was in America at the time, I believe. So released in 2004, the novel was immediately a bestseller in Sweden before being translated into several other languages, including English, although that translation wouldn't be published until about 2007. And by that time, the book had already been the subject of a bidding war, with film producers fighting for the rights to adapt it to the big screen.
I would just like to say right here, for no other reason than just it's a fun fact, the title of the book and movie, Let the Right One In, did you know that it came from the lyrics to the song Let the Right One Slip In by Morrissey?
Yeah. I did know that, actually.
Well,
I found that too. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I did know that. Apparently, Lindqvist is a huge Morrissey fan. Or was. I mean, I feel like most Morrissey fans, I feel like by this point you should have learned better. Like Morrissey is a terrible dude. And I say that as a fan of the Smiths and as a fan of some of Morrissey's, solo work. But dude, that guy is insufferable. He really,
he's something else. I will say that I think that specific title would have been the extra push this movie needed to be banned.
Let the right one slip in.
Yeah.
I'm glad. But in the song itself, the lyrics actually say "Let the right one in." Like those are the I don't know. The song is called "Let the Right One Slip In," but if you listen to the song, it is "Let the Right One In" is what he's singing. But yeah, I think that they probably made the right decision by going with omitting the slip.
Yeah.
In all of its forms.
in every way you can take that phrase. Oh man, we're getting off track really early on this episode.
We'll come back around.
Well, we haven't recorded together in a while, so
we have fun.
We have fun.
Good times.
It was Swedish producer John Nordling who ultimately won that bidding war battle, optioning the rights in 2004, not long after the novel's publication. And Nordling was far from the first person to get those to try to get those rights. According to him, he was something like the 48th person to contact the publisher about it. Like everybody wanted this book because it had been so popular there in Sweden. But Nordling was the one whose vision for the film most aligned with what Lindqvist wanted out of an adaptation of his work. So once the rights were secured and all the proper paperwork was signed, Nordling and Lindqvist began the hunt for a director who'd share their vision for the film, and they found one that, on paper, seemed an unlikely fit for the material.
So I have a little tidbit about the quote-unquote proper paperwork, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but in April of 2010, Hammer Films and Dark Horse Comics announced that they were producing a 4-issue miniseries based on the American adaptation of this film, and it's just called Let Me In. The series, titled Let Me In Crossroads, is a prequel to the film, and that was released back December of that same year, 2010. And Lindqvist said, nobody has asked me about doing a comic, and I think the project stinks. I'm looking into this matter, and I hope they have no right to do this. So read your contracts, kids, because later, he was informed. He informed the fans and his followers and whatnot that he had in fact unwittingly sold the rights for the comic, stating that the producers had misled him as to the details of the contract. So,
get your lawyer to go over that contract, John.
Yeah, like cross your T's and dot your lowercase J's, kids. It's important.
I definitely have not read that comic, but I did know that it existed and that he had disowned it. So I mean, he had nothing to do with it. So he, I guess disowning is not the right term, but yeah, he is not not a fan of what they did with it. Wait, did you just go on that because I said the word paperwork because comics are written on paper, or because of the contract?
To be honest, it was both. I was just kind of like, oh, this works in a couple different ways.
Sure, okay, sure.
And my apologies, we're kind of going out of order here, but I just saw that and was like, let's look into this a little bit, and found it was like, yeah, we're going to talk about this. So
yeah, I feel like we could have talked about that when we talk about the remake later on in the episode.
Yeah.
Too late now.
It's too late. Yeah,
I got
premium
ahead.
content. Here it is.
Well, Thomas Alfredson was first introduced to Let the Right One In when a friend gifted him a copy of the book. And by then, he was already a well-established filmmaker in Sweden, and one that had met with quite a bit of success. So he was born in 1965. Alfredson was the son of a well-known Swedish actor, writer, director, comedian named Hans Alfredson. So even as a child, he'd been exposed to public life. Like he kind of grew up in, not in Hollywood, obviously, but in that version and then in the spotlight. And he got his first taste of filmmaking when he'd assist his father on his film productions every summer.
Not a bad way to spend your summer.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, he learned the trade. I think the first thing he did was like he worked with like the props and things like that. So, on with the props department, yeah. What a cool summer vacation to work on films. His official entry into filmmaking happened when Alfredson was in his early 20s. He got to start working for several television companies, including Sweden's official public broadcasting station, where he helped to develop several popular new shows, mostly like kids' TV shows. And his career really kicked into gear in 1994 when he co-directed a 12-episode TV series called Bert. B-E-R-T, Bert, which was based on a series of popular teenage novels. And the show's success led to Alfredson directing a feature-length adaptation of the Bert books called Bert, the Last Virgin. And for his feature film debut, Alfredson would receive a Best Direction nomination for and forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, but a Guldbagge Award. That sounds Swedish, right? The way I said that?
Yeah. I'd buy that I'd buy that at IKEA.
Yeah, Guldbagge. Yeah, it does sound like a piece of furniture from IKEA. Yeah. No offense to our Swedish listeners. We can say that about everything because I don't know what I don't know what a single word in IKEA means, including the word IKEA, which apparently is not how you say IKEA in Swedish. It's pronounced differently in Swedish. And I don't remember the
they're so polite. They're so polite and not correcting us stupid Americans.
But anyway, the Guldbagge Award is the Swedish equivalent of the Academy Award. So for his first movie, I mean, he'd already done a lot of TV shows and stuff. But for his first feature-length movie, he got the Swedish equivalent of an Academy Award nomination for Best Director. So not a bad start. Yeah. And he's really young. He's like 28 years old or something at this time. He followed that film up with a series of television films made in collaboration with the Swedish comedy group Killinganet. It sounds like aggressive when I say it like that.
Yeah. That's out back behind the Guldbagge Awards. Yeah. There's a street gang known as Killinganet. Killinganet. I don't know. We're gonna get letters.
These guys were like, they were the Swedish, not Monty Python, Kids in the Hall. From what I've seen, I watched a few of their sketches. Admittedly, they were in Swedish without subtitles, so I didn't have a lot of clue what was going on. Except one of them was about ABBA, which I understood the context there. So I got the impersonations they were doing at least, but I got Kids in the Hall vibes from them. Yeah, there's a few of their skits are on YouTube, but they are unsubtitled. So you either have to know Swedish or just be willing to try to figure out what's going on. But he'd been collaborating with them for a long time. He was basically like a part of the sketch group essentially, but he was like the behind the scenes guy, kind of like a Terry Gilliam.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Terry Gilliam did appear on screen, but more of his work was behind the scenes.
I thought more Chris Guest with like the folks from, was it Groundlings or from the Canadian group that
SCTV?
Yes, SCTV.
Yeah, SCTV. Yeah. But of course, Chris Guest became a in front of the camera guy later on too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But anyway, this collaboration with Killinganet led to a feature film collaboration with the group called 4 Shades of Brown, which is the only film to date that comedy troupe has made. And that film received 4 Guldbagge Awards, including one for Best Direction for Alfredson. So he received he didn't just get nominated this time, but he actually won this time. So it wasn't very long after the release of Four Shades of Brown that Alfredson first approached Lindqvist, making it clear that he wanted to be involved in a film adaptation of Let the Right One In because he had loved the novel. Like his friend gave him the novel and he kind of was trepidatious about reading it. Like I've seen in a couple interviews where he's like, I don't think like you should just like give somebody a book and expect that they're going to like it. Like picking out a book is a very personal thing, he says, which I don't fully agree with. I think if somebody knows your taste, then they can recommend a book to you. But that's what he said. So, but he ended up reading it anyway, and he loved it so much that he wanted to make it into a movie. So he actually approached the author about it. Now, much like John Nordling, Alfredson was far from the first director to come knocking on Lindqvist's door, hoping to adapt the book. But after the two met, they just kind of clicked. The two, it seemed, had a lot in common. Ironically, despite the serious tone of the book, one thing the two had in common was a background in comedy. Alfredson, with his years working with Killinganet, while Lindqvist had actually had a career as a stand-up comedian before turning his attention to writing. So one could say he's a writer-comedian.
Hey, there it is. Yeah, I was gonna see if I unfortunately I ran out of time, but I was gonna see if there was any footage of Lindqvist doing stand-up. I'd like to take a look, see if his it's a dark humor or
well, it's probably all in Swedish, so you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, it's I think if I can catch like you watching the sketches, I think if I can catch one reference or two, I might be able to.
They said ABBA.
They said ABBA.
Dancing Queen.
This goes into the location. I think they connected on like where the location of the book was as well. Lindqvist said in his stand-up would find himself constantly talking about Blackburg, and I'm sure we'll talk about location more later, but that he had jokes about rival gangs of senior citizens that would compete against each other, the stuff that would go on there. So he was that was a big thing. So when he wrote the book, he had gone there to write the book and just like be in that environment because he felt like apparently this is the place that inspires me, and that's where he came up with the idea. Like, I don't even think he set out. I guess maybe at that time he said he had the idea of like a vampire, but he was just writing this novel and somehow the idea of like, what if you returned when you were a young kid and you're just like in the middle of this place and like it's just what would that be like if you're forever stuck in this body and having to kill people and drink their blood to live? Like, what would that existence be like? And so he's like, just for some reason at that location, was writing about this story. It was just like, God, it'd be miserable, gross, and lonely. So he said, so Ellie. And
I mean, that area, that the way it's depicted in the film as well, even though we'll talk about it, they didn't shoot there, but that area is very like almost industrial looking. Like it's like it's got a very apparently what happened. So Sweden was not involved in World War II. And this is something I read that Alfredson talked about. And they built these sort of like city centers where they would build these apartment blocks right next to each other. And it was like affordable living for like upper, lower class and lower middle class people. Like, they're not like the poorest of the poor, but they're not well off, and it was affordable housing for people like that. And that the buildings all kind of looked alike. They're all very like, the architecture was very similar. There was always a town square where there was like your post office and your courthouse and your state sanctioned like liquor store and all these things that were run by the state. And that's kind of where he's going from with pulling influence from that area. Like, and you look at it, it is very depressing, I guess. I mean, that's the only word I can think of when I look at it. It's like, it's kind of depressing. It's kind of a depressing place to imagine living.
I mean, this kind of gets into a little bit of the cinematography, but like it's gorgeous. But at the same time, like looking at the landscape with the weather and those style of buildings, it feels very cold.
It does. Yeah. It gives you a chill just looking at it.
And you talking about that reminded me, because I was reading an interview with Lindqvist about this, but what it was like, I guess he had thought about the vampire aspect of it, just being like, what would that be like being a vampire? But in that area, he specifically says, I remember this now because it just, ironically, because of the way this movie is talked about, he was saying like being there helped him realize like this would be a good place for a vampire. Like a vampire could just hang out in a place like this and not get noticed as easily. It also kills all of the romanticized thoughts of vampires that people have developed over time. And this just cold and lonely and desolate and just
nothing glamorous about it at all.
Exactly.
Well, Lindqvist himself insisted on writing the film's screenplay. Now, As we've learned from other films that we've covered here on the podcast, it's not always the best idea for an author to adapt their own book because they tend to be a little too close to the material. They find it hard to kill their darlings, so to speak. We've seen this even as recently as on our Dune episode, where Frank Herbert took a stab at adapting his own book, only to turn into something that was completely unwieldy and unfilmable. I think he even admitted as much. He's like, this sucks. I should not be the one doing this. So he passed it on to someone else. And that happens a lot when an author tries to do that. Not always. There are exceptions. So Alfredson was understandably a little skeptical about Lindqvist writing the screenplay, but he was pleasantly surprised when the author submitted a script that pared down the story into something that would work better on screen, omitting many of the book's minor characters and subplots, and focusing primarily on the story and relationship between the two lead characters, Ellie and Oscar. Other elements of the book were toned down or left more ambiguous than they had been in the book, especially in regards to Ellie's backstory and the character of Hakan, which is Ellie's caretaker, or I guess you could say maybe Ellie's familiar, who in the book is pretty explicitly described as a pedophile, who first met Ellie when he was an adult. So he met Ellie when he's an adult, and now he's got a companion who is perpetually forever a child. Which if he's written as a pedophile, that's pretty fucking creepy, right?
Yeah.
But the film only kind of hints at this aspect. It's very vague about it. They leave it open to interpretation. And this change was made at Alfredson's suggestion because he worried that focusing too much on the idea of Hakan being a pedophile would detract from the main story between Ellie and Oscar, and he wanted that to be his focus.
Well,
and
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say good call.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
I thought about this in hindsight after I'd finished watching the film, because I thought, again, based on how things end up with Oscar going with Ellie, I was like, is he going to end up being her new caretaker? So I was like, is this kind of the tragedy of her life, is that she does fall in love with somebody, but they keep aging? I didn't know the pedophile aspect, and just I just accepted it on face value that she's got this person. So
I assumed the same thing you did. I don't know that I ever, because I don't look at Ellie as quite as sympathetically as that all the time, but I did think that Oscar's destiny was the same. Like this was like the circle of life.
Well, that's the thing. I think that this was the right move on Alfredson's part, 100%. I mean, there are moments between Hakan and Ellie that even when I first saw the movie, knowing nothing about the differences made from the novel, made me a little uneasy, because their relationship it was definitely not a father-daughter relationship. So there's something about, a 60-year-old man and a 12-year-old girl having a close relationship, an undefined close relationship, that's a little creepy in any context, right? When they're not related. Especially
at least this way, though, you could play it out in your mind that he started there as her age at first.
Sure. Yeah. But watching it, especially on first time viewing, it is going to make you a little bit uneasy. I think it's fine that they do hint at it. There are a couple of moments, basically looks between the two. There's a moment where she caresses his face towards the end of his story and things like that. But I think by specifically not saying anything about him being a pedophile makes it does make the character more sympathetic. Because if he had been a pedophile, well, we want him to die.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly when he does die, you get this oh, this is the end of his story, and he's just a kid who loved her his whole life, and something like that. But if he's a pedo, then you're like
fuck that guy. Yeah,
fuck that guy.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes him a more sympathetic character, despite the fact that he is kind of technically a serial killer. But, he is. But
he's just looking out for his friend. He's not doing anything I wouldn't do for either of you. Can we edit that out?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Gary. I need you to do something for me. We can talk more after the show.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
But I do think that he becomes a more complex character, and his relationship with Ellie becomes more complex because it's motivated by something more than just him being a pervert, right? In this version of the story, we don't know when he and Ellie met. We can only infer or guess or theorize because he may I thought the same thing as you guys, that he may very well have met Ellie when he was Oscar's age, and through their friendship, he kind of became her protector, a position that seems to have ruined his life, to be honest. He has been stuck in this, if let's say he's 60 years old, he's probably in his late 50s, 60s. So for the last better on half a century, he's been living this life where he has to kill people. He's not very good at it. He seems to be getting worse at it. And to maybe move on to a new city, maybe that's why they ended up here anyway, because he fucked up at the last place and they had to go on the run. But by suggesting that, we also do view her and Oscar's relationship with more trepidation, because we see that he is on a path, especially because he's already got an unhealthy obsession with serial killers. He's on a path to become the next Hawken, and he's just going to ruin his own life. So it becomes a tragedy. You described it as a tragedy for her, but it's much more of a tragedy for him, because this is the rest of his life is he's going to have to take care of her, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So another change that Alfredson suggested was removing a scene from the novel that shows what happens when a vampire enters a room uninvited. But Lindqvist was really adamant that this needed to be in the film. And the resulting scene where we see Ellie slowly bleeding from their ears and eyes and pores and everything, that it ends up becoming one of the film's most celebrated scenes. It's incredibly effective. It is a fantastic scene, and it is not like anything that I can recall ever seeing in a vampire movie before.
No. In fact, I think the notion, because I mean, I do like vampire movies and I'm fascinated by the lore, and I think of all the elements, like the stereotypical elements of vampire lore, this is one that is almost completely dismissed or maybe just mentioned. I was racking my brain of trying to think of movies that, you know, sort of address it, and the only one I thought of was Lost Boys, where, you know, he goes, "Oh, you invited me in, that makes you powerless."
Yeah, Richard Gilmore comes in the house.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Right.
Here's our Gilmore Girls reference, folks.
Gotta have one.
Yeah. To be honest, when she first walked in, I was just kind of like, oh, they're just kind of, it's a thing that exists, but this is one of those ones where it's not true. And then she starts bleeding. And it's like, oh shit. And it's subtle at first, but then when you see it, it's kind of like, it's incredible. Like it's really well done.
It's really well done. And it's something like it, like you said, in most vampire movies, it's either not addressed or it's just like it's mentioned as a rule. Or maybe somebody says something, they accidentally invite somebody in who's a vampire, right. and we know that, we just inherently know that that's a rule, but we've never seen the consequences of it, other than like, I literally just can't come in. Like on Buffy, I think if I remember correctly, like a vampire literally just can't walk through the door. Like there's a force field or there's some invisible force keeping them out. Yeah. But this is much cooler, in my opinion.
It was perfect timing too, because that you're talking about, like literally I'm watching this with the wife, and she right at that moment is like, I wonder what happens if they really do walk in, or like, can they just not walk in, or like what? And then
she did it.
Like, you're like, now if you just shut up during the movie, maybe it would answer.
It's a good thing she doesn't listen to this podcast. But that scene, Alfredson, when he first filmed it, he was a little worried about it becoming what he called too American, and in a bad way. That was his exact words. So he actually cut the music out. There's like no music in that scene. Yeah. And he really toned down the special effects because he felt like it was getting a little too sensational, which doesn't fit the rest of the movie. Honestly, the movie isn't. The violence in this movie is not sensational at all, except for maybe the last scene, which I'm sure we will talk about. But for the most part, it's a very quiet movie, and he felt like it was becoming a little bit too much. So he actually like really toned the scene down, and I think that makes it more effective personally.
Along those same lines, when we first meet Ellie and she jumps down, or like basically falls / jumps off of the jungle gym, and you can tell like gravity's a little different there. Like wire work is always such a tricky thing, and it always looks so obvious and fake, but I was just like, it's such a subtle thing.
It's very subtle.
It looked so good. I was like, oh, that's the kind of movie we're gonna watch.
It's just off enough. It's just off enough to make you go, wait a second.
Yep.
Story-wise, though, I mean, points to Lindqvist for this one, you know, that he was super behind this scene being a part of it, because also another thing that it does, looking back on it and having seen this movie before, this time around, for some reason, this is a scene that stands out to me that, like, between the two of them, Ellie and Oscar, it like played with the power dynamic, or like what the dynamic is between the two of them too, because there was a part of it that's kind of, you're sympathetic to Ellie, and then there's also a part of it that's kind of, to me, like, this is also kind of abuser behavior where she's just like, I'll do it. Like, see what you're doing to me. Look what you're doing to me.
She's
right
gaslighting.
Now.
She's gaslighting him.
Yeah.
You're causing this to happen because you just wouldn't invite me in. And it was like,
you're right.
For some reason, this time watching it, I was like, oh, she's so conniving.
Yeah, that you could definitely see that as being manipulative. I've never thought of it that way, but you're right. I mean, and she is sort of manipulating him into becoming the next Hakan. Because he's getting old. He's getting old. He's on the way out. He's got to retire soon. I mean,
you can read this movie, especially after you think about the scene where he fails in that killing that he tries at the beginning. And she's just like, how many times do I have to tell you I need this? Like, there's a dark side to Ellie that you only get little glimpses of.
Yeah.
And the way that she's talking to him, like very demanding and just like forceful.
Yeah.
For some reason, this time around, watching that scene, I'm just like, oh, she's grooming him right now.
Yeah. Wow. I never thought about that, but you're right.
Yeah, because it made me think of, when Kirsten Dunst's character first gets changed in Interview with the Vampire, she's approaching the life of a vampire as a little girl. Mm-hmm. So there's all those demands. There's all those, that particular type of behavior, that manipulative behavior. Yeah. And one of the things that struck me in reading that was, she's 12. But in reading, I think it's more implied in the book that she is 12 in body and mind. But you can see, it begs to question, what does living forever, presumably, what does that do to a person, let alone what does that do to a 12-year-old?
Yeah.
And,
now let's talk
how
about
would that manifest?
Now let's talk about the pronouns we're choosing and
yes. Yeah.
Well,
aspect of it.
Well, let's talk about that. So as for Ellie's backstory, in the book, it is stated that Ellie is actually an androgynous boy. Elias, I think, was his name in the book, who had been castrated by a sadistic vampire nobleman 200 years earlier, centuries earlier. But the film handles Ellie's gender more ambiguously. There's a very brief scene in the film where Oscar sees Ellie changing into a dress, and we get a short glimpse of a suggestive scar in the crotchal area. Yeah. But the film never elaborates on it any further. It leaves it completely open into interpretation by the viewer.
And let me just state right here, sorry, Justin, that for our Cinema Shock Plus listeners who are going to have to hear all about this in further viewing, it's a fucking mannequin. It's a mannequin. It is not that little girl's crotch.
Does anyone think that it was?
It really feels like a lot of people think it is.
What? People don't know how movies are made? Anyway, so I guess you said further viewing, but I think somebody needs a nap is probably what you're...
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Not
further viewing. We don't want to show you some actual movies.
Well, if you like this scene...
Oh,
geez.
I am failing on all cylinders today.
Yeah. I'm sorry. What's that? We're canceled. All right. That's all for us. Thanks so much, guys.
Who is he talking to?
I got a producer off camera.
Well, the film does give a few other hints about this as well, mostly in dialogue, such as when Oscar asks Ellie to be his girlfriend, to which Ellie responds, "I'm not a girl," a response which could be seen as a confession that, hey, I'm a vampire, i.e. not human and therefore not a girl, or it could be seen more literally as a confession that they are not a girl but a boy. In the final film, Ellie's androgyny is taken even further because while the character is played by a young actress named Lena Leanderson, her voice was actually an actress named Elif Ceylan. They dubbed her voice because Elif Ceylan has a much deeper voice. They wanted it to sound a little more boyish. So they hired an actress, so it's not completely, doesn't completely throw you off, but it is a considerably deeper voice than you would expect to come out of a 12-year-old girl.
I was gonna say, damn, that's subtle too. Because I totally bought and it was just like, man, the gravitas from this girl is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently Lee Anderson's voice just had too delicate and feminine.
Too girly.
Actually, yeah, the sound designer, Per Sundstrom, he mentioned that he also felt that the other voice was a little more threatening. So there was that aspect of it as well.
And they didn't make that decision until well into the post-production process. This wasn't something that was planned. It was as they were editing and things that they decided to make that choice. And I think it works really well because, and it is subtle. There's a lot of subtlety in this movie, and the special effects are generally pretty subtle. The way they use CGI, like with the exception of the cat scene, which is not very subtle.
I was gonna wait and save that for later, but yeah,
well, we can talk about it later. But like,
okay.
There's a scene like when Ellie's hungry and her eyes are slightly bigger than they need to be.
Yeah.
It's like, it's very like, you're not quite sure if what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Or the shots where they show her look up and she's got a completely different face.
She's not her. Yeah.
It's not
yeah,
her.
yeah, I saw that too. And it made me do a double take of just like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What is
Because
that?
it's like close enough, but it's like almost subliminal. It's really well done. I mean, anyway, we'll praise this film more, I guess, later. But, but let's talk more about the casting, since we did mention Lee Anderson. So finding perfect actors for these roles, especially the kids' roles, was a very time-consuming process that took nearly a year, with open casting calls held all over Sweden. And when the casting call for Ellie went out, the casting call actually called for a boy or a girl about 12 years old. So they were very kind of vague with it, even with the casting call. And Lee Anderson had not really made any movies or anything at this point, but she had always shown an interest in acting since she was a kid. She'd done some school plays and things like that. So when she saw the ad for the casting call, she sent in a video to the film's casting director, and she got called in for an audition. After 3 auditions, she landed the role. On the other hand, Kari Hedebrandt, who would eventually be cast as Oscar, had absolutely no aspirations to become an actor. He has said so in interviews, and I don't think he's done anything since. I think he's done one movie since this. He just wanted to try it out. So during the casting process, the production came to his school. They gathered all the students into the assembly hall, and they had them line up and record a tape where they talked about themselves. So basically a screen test. They had all these kids do screen tests, and I guess they just picked the ones that they liked and the ones that they thought had, a screen presence. And based on Hedebrandt's video, he was contacted to come in for a full audition, and eventually he won the part that way. So he was not seeking this out. I thought that was really interesting, is that they just like saw something in him that they thought would work for this role. And honestly, like, both of these actors are really wonderful in this. Like,
I assume for Kari Hedebrandt that the director was just like, guys, just find me the kid who's constantly snotting into his own mouth. That would be best for me.
He needs to look like he is almost translucent, and that a strong wind would blow him over.
Right.
That's what we're going for here. But no, I do think they're both really great. I think Lee Anderson is incredible, even if it's not her voice. Like, just her performance in general is much better. Kid actors are always a crapshoot, because a lot of times they feel like they're acting. Like, they feel like, especially if they have a history of acting on stage and things like that, in school plays where you're playing to the rafters, like it's goofy, like it's silly.
She has to be very subtle, and it's weird because like she's kind of the same story where she doesn't do much film after the sum, but she's
done a little bit more
theater.
than him. Yeah, she's done more than him, but she has not done a lot.
Yeah, I was looking her up, and she's been doing a lot of like stage plays, or at least up into the 2020s. So like she still likes acting, I guess. At least she's an actress, but interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, and talking about his direction of these two kids, if you read in interviews with Alfredson, it's really interesting because he didn't let them read the script. He basically didn't want them to try to like come in with an idea of who these characters were. He wanted to be able to shape that himself, which is smart because they're 11, 12 years old. You don't.
Lee Anderson walks in with a cape on, and it's just
right,
like,
yeah. So he would give them lines. He would give them lines that they were supposed to say on the day of, and he would kind of give them direction from off camera, like, "Hey, look at her hair. Look at it in a weird way. The snow's not melting on her hair. Why is the snow not melting?" Like, he would give these lines to them while they're filming, which his sound editors hated. But that's how he got such good performances out of them, is that he was kind of like telling them what to do, how to perform during the scene, which is I guess a good way to get them not to do a big hammy kid acting thing.
Oscar, I once knew an Oscar. He lived in one garbage can.
You think the count sounds like that in Sweden on Swedish Sesame Street?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sure.
What if he just has like a
meatball? Two meatballs.
all of our context for Sweden comes directly from IKEA.
Yep, that's it.
Oh man!
Look at picture one. Hey,
All the parts you need are included.
I think we have really run this joke into the ground.
Yep. Yep, that's it.
Now I want some Swedish meatballs from IKEA though. Yeah, with that, what's that berry sauce that they come with?
I've
Starts with
never
a
been
J.
to IKEA.
Oh
What?
man, I love
Oh,
IKEA.
man.
Yeah.
Fun.
Sorry.
It's fun. Putting the stuff together, you will never hear me cuss so much as when I'm trying to put those things together. But I do love IKEA. So for the role of Hakan, who Alfredson cast a veteran stage and television actor named Per Ragnar. It's a cool name. Who had begun his career in the mid-60s, where after graduating from the Royal Dramatic Training Academy, which is like Sweden's like national acting school, after he graduated there, he landed a job as the director's assistant on a stage play to Ingmar Bergman,
Holy
Sweden's
shit.
greatest director of all time.
Yeah.
Ingmar
This
Bergman.
brother is unique. Yeah, he had the Ingmar Bergman reference, and then like he's also like really into religious philosophy and such.
Wow.
Like he's like written some stuff about that, and like so he's a smart fella. It seems like
Yeah.
very well read person.
And another one who's not in a lot of movies. I mean, he's obviously in more than the kids are, but I think he is still both before and after this primarily a stage actor.
What's interesting too is that there's not many. The adult roles are there; they have to be. There's the parents. There's some teachers.
Well, there's
see
all the
like,
residents around the neighborhood, who all
Right,
hang out,
right.
And most of them, like, also are, I think, mostly stage people.
Yeah, it seems like not many people from. I think the older brother is like the only one who seems like he's. I think it was him. Maybe not. Maybe I'm mixing it up. I'm probably messing this up. I should know better. But there's like one of the kids has been in stuff like as recently as this year. Like who's been
Still
doing
all
stuff.
Swedish stuff. They're not nothing.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Those adults, like it's weird. Like that's the only part that doesn't fit this. That the director was saying he was looking more for this to be specifically through Oscar's eyes. That that this is how Oscar views the world. You're viewing it as he views it. So then in the situations with adults, it's like half the things that go wrong, the adults might have been able to step in and do something, but they don't. They're not paying attention. They don't care. Or not that they're evil, but just that they're distracted.
They're distracted by their own shit. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that you could say that necessarily about the other townspeople who I'll talk about it more in a minute, I think. But Oscar's parents definitely like have their own shit going on. Like the parents are separated. The mother is, she seems to be like she works nights and things like that to support Oscar. The dad seems like he's gay, and which I guess probably contributed to the end of their marriage. But that because it's not explicitly said, but the guy who comes over, the friend who comes over, I mean they don't share like a normal friend relationship. Like you definitely get the vibe that like, oh, this is his boyfriend that came over.
Yeah, and like he's playing a game with Oscar up until the point that guy gets there, and then he has like no time for Oscar.
Then he pulls out the liquor and like so Oscar is kind of pushed to the side so that he can hang out with his boyfriend. But so the parents are definitely like are oblivious to what's going
and
on.
the teachers.
And
Like
the teachers, yeah.
That dweeb of a teacher that goes marching out to the trash fire outside, or
the like
does the weight
gym
training
teacher or whatever. Yeah.
Who like, well, Oscar's gonna die on the bench press, and he's just like reading a magazine, or whatever.
That's what gym teachers do.
That is literally what my gym teacher did in school.
That tracks.
And he had a whistle he blew every once in a while.
Yep.
And then he would sit at a desk and be like, play dodgeball.
Yep.
Don't kill each other. And he would like read his paper.
Yep. So although the film is set in the Stockholm suburb of Blackbird, which we've talked about a little bit already, the majority of the shoot took place in the northern Swedish town of Luleå. That one's really hard to say. Luleå.
Yeah.
So
I thought it was Luleå.
I looked it up, and it's kind of it's a weird pronunciation. It's like, I mean, you're saying it how it's kind of
I was looking at
written,
I was looking at the translation notes.
it's kind of like Luleå.
Yeah. But yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, Luleå.
I would once again like to apologize to the entire country of Sweden. But this area, this town, was chosen primarily because the architecture was similar to what would have been seen in Blacksburg in the early 1980s, where the film takes place.
The other reason is that it was colder there and had the weather that they were looking for the exterior shots.
Because in Blacksburg, it doesn't really snow nearly as much, and they wanted a place that like it was almost guaranteed to have snow on the ground.
Alfredson, in one interview I was reading, says Stockholm isn't as cold as people think it could be. It's like every 5 or 6 years there's a proper winter, but we needed cold, we needed snow, so we had to go north, and so that was where we picked this place for. He said like nearly everything exterior is shot there.
Yeah. To achieve the film's look, Alfredson worked really closely with a cinematographer by the name of Hoyt van Hoytema, which is also just a great name. Their names are great, aren't they?
Yeah.
Hoyt van Hoytema, who primarily worked on Norwegian films before being hired to work on Let the Right One In. Although in recent years, this guy's name looked familiar. So like I looked into him. I was like, where have I seen that name? Like that's a very unique name. So it's obviously going to stand out. And in recent years, he's become a highly sought after cinematographer in America. His first American film was David O. Russell's The Fighter, followed by, and when I name these movies, you're going to be like, those are all great looking movies, right?
Oh yeah.
He followed that up by another collaboration with Alfredson on the director's English language debut, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Hoytema would go on to work with Spike Jonze on Her, Sam Mendes on Spectre, James Gray on Ad Astra, and Jordan Peele on Nope. And he's become Christopher Nolan's go-to cinematographer, working on all of that director's films since Interstellar, everything he's done. And he's received an Academy Award nomination for 2 of those films, one of which he won for Oppenheimer.
Those are all great looking films.
They are.
I did not know this, and I, for some reason, didn't even look at him until I saw your notes on this. And that's amazing to me, because the first thing I remember when I thought about Let the Right One In is I remembered watching it and thinking how beautiful it looked. Like just the snow and just the snowfall and just the outside. I just that stood out to me. It was one of those movies that the look of the movie definitely mattered.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
100%. I mean, it's a beautiful film, and the way that they use the color palette, where it's mostly blues and grays and with splashes of red, like the scene specifically where Laka is killed by Ellie in the bathroom. It's so well shot, where it's like everything, the walls are all white, everything's really uniform. All the colors are kind of muted. The door is kind of halfway closed. You see her attacking him in the bathroom, and then you see his hand come out and slap the door and leaves that blood streak on it. And the blood streak like really feels visceral because it's a big splash of color in an otherwise kind of drab environment. It's really, really well done. So
he does it a lot with red, by the way.
He does.
Throughout the movie, there's like these little pieces of red somewhere or something, or like just that bright color.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And specifically for this film, Hoytema and Alfredson developed a lighting technique that they called spray light, which Hoytema described as saying, this is a quote from him, "If you could capture dull electric light in a can and spray it like hairspray across Ellie's apartment, it would have the same result as what we created."
Yeah, because it does. Her apartment does feel, I mean, part of that is the lack of the typical, furniture and dressings of an apartment, but there is something about it that makes it even more stark and empty and cold.
Yeah, very lonely.
Yeah.
And also by using this like spray light technique, so they would shoot the outside where the light source was really kind of far away. Like they'd have it like 40 feet away, so that the white wasn't just all uniform white. They wanted it to have like blues and grays in the snow. And if they had the lights closer, it would have blown it all out. It would have been white and bright and sort of like more joyful, because you associate that with like, Christmas and things like that, like white snow. And, it has good connotations. Yeah. They wanted it to be more cold. They wanted it to feel cold. So they wanted blues and grays. And they did that by moving the light source further away.
I wanted to mention too, the sound too is really good.
Yeah.
And I touched on the sound earlier, but the way they did some of the gorier stuff I thought was fun. Like just when she bites into skin, they're like biting into sausages and stuff like that.
Yum.
And it's like drinking yogurt to like make the
slurp
sound for the slurp for blood and stuff like that. I just thought that was
the sound design is great.
They did something with like when the kids are blinking, they like grapes rubbing together. Like there was
when they're what blinking.
When she's like blinking,
when she's blinking,
and so that makes like a weird
noise,
a sound.
It's another one of those like subtle things. Like even the sound design in this is, we keep saying subtle, but I think that's part of this movie's strength.
Its subtlety is what makes it stand out. Which is
but
weird,
you're right. I mean, you're right though. There are one thing in the sound design that I always think about is the sound of Ellie's stomach growling.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
when she needs to feed, like it doesn't sound like a normal stomach growling. It doesn't sound like my stomach would growl when I'm hungry. You know, there's something more feral about it.
Yeah.
There's something that's like more animalistic about it. Like you understand, like this is not a normal hunger that she's experiencing. This is like if I don't eat something right now, it's going to turn me into a beast, which is what happens, which is why she attacks not Laka, but Laka's friend under the bridge, is because she's desperate because
Jacques or whatever.
yeah, Jacques, because she's desperate because her caretaker fucked up bringing her dinner. So she is desperate for food and has to turn to that. So she turns almost to an animal. Same thing with like when she sees Oscar's blood, when he does the blood brother thing and his blood drips on the ground and she turns into an animal, you know? And that's when he first glimpses her as something more than just human. But the sound is a big part of that, honestly.
You know, this is another part of the movie too, that you get a couple of times. I feel like around him, there's that sound, and you know what that is. She's like fighting it off. And
Trying to
I feel like some
it.
people keep calling this like very romantic and very sweet, but like she doesn't want to hurt him, you know, like she doesn't. But this time watching it, for some reason, I'm like viewing everything as she doesn't want to hurt him because she
needs him.
For the moment, the moment that he like hands her the Rubik's Cube, there's like a glimmer in her eye that like, oh, this is my next person.
But I think it can be both. I think she does genuinely care about him, and I think she genuinely cared about Hakan. Like it feels like she doesn't view him as just. Yeah, she is abusive towards him at times, but you do see a genuine affection between the two of them.
Well, and that could be the hunger, or I'll probably land in the middle eventually, but like maybe the last time watching it, I was like, oh, it's sweet. And this time watching it, I was like, oh, she's an asshole. And,
I think it's both. I mean, I think it can absolutely be both. I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think there's a little
like
bit
when
of
she
both of
touched
those
his Hakan's face, I almost saw it this time for some reason as a like, you poor thing. Let me like give you a little bit of a touch.
Yeah. I don't know, but I think it does fall somewhere in between where it's like she does genuinely care for both of them. I really do think that, but they are also tools of necessity for her because she can't go out and hunt on her. I mean, she can, but we see where that got her a couple of times.
She'd just basically be like a fucking cougar running through town, you know?
Right, exactly, and making more vampires sometimes, like she does with the cat lady.
And I don't mean that because she's an older lady. I just mean
she is 212 years old.
Yeah, right.
So Let the Right One In premiered at the Gothenburg Film Festival in Sweden on January 26, 2008, where Alfredson won the festival's Nordic Film Prize, which is like one of their like top awards. It played several other festivals over the following months, including the Tribeca Film Festival in New York, where it won the Founders Award for Best Narrative Feature, and the Edinburgh Film Festival, where it won the Rotten Tomatoes Critical Consensus Award. The film was actually originally scheduled for a wide release in April of that year, but because it was doing so well and had received such an overwhelmingly positive response on the festival circuit, the decision was made to postpone its release to the fall because if somehow with the way the release schedule worked, if they released it in the fall, it would have a chance to stay out in theaters for longer. More people could see it, make more money at the box office. So they wanted to keep the hype train rolling, essentially. It would ultimately be released on October 24th, 2008 in Sweden, Norway, and in limited release in the United States. Although the majority of American audiences would get their chance to see it the following March, when it was released on Blu-ray and DVD by Magnet Films. Although that release did receive some criticism for using new oversimplified English subtitles, and after receiving enough customer complaints about it because so many people had seen it on the festival circuit that they knew it was wrong, Magnet released a new version with the original theatrical subtitles. And in fact, the Blu-ray that I have, if you go to the subtitle option, it has both. One says Swedish and one says Swedish theatrical or something like that, which were the original version, which is what I ended up watching.
It was crazy to me that when I first started it, for some reason, my Blu-ray went straight to the English dub.
Mine did too, and that pisses me off. I hate that.
Yeah, I was like, wait, is this movie in English? I was like, no, this is the corny dub version, I can tell.
When I hit play, the first thing I heard was an American voice saying "squeal like a pig." I was like, what's going on? That's one of my, like, it's a stupid pet peeve because it's easy to fix, but when you hit play on a movie on a Blu-ray or on streaming, because sometimes streaming does that too, and it's a foreign language film and they default to the corny English dub. Okay, offer the English dub as an option for people who are too lazy to read subtitles, but don't make that the default. Like make the original language the default. That's how most people who are watching that, I assume, would want to see it. So reviews for the film were overwhelmingly positive. Now, I don't put a whole lot of stake in Rotten Tomatoes' black and white categorization of film criticism because I think it lacks it misses a lot of the nuance. If a review's mixed, they have to throw it in one or the other, But when a movie sits at a whopping 98% on the site, so almost everyone who's watched it has given it a positive review, you got to be a little bit impressed, right?
I go through like reviews and I try to see, part of my job here is finding the bad ones, but I try to look at professional reviews sometimes to see if there's one where somebody just goes ape shit on a movie, but people love this movie. I mean, and as far as pro reviewers go, pro critics, I mean, it tops like all kinds of lists, like Empire Magazine. I think besides like City of God, this is the only like foreign film that like made their top of the year list, and it's in Letterboxd's like top horror movies and IMDb's, and like people generally just think this is a great movie, and I get it, it's a unique vampire movie.
Well, back in its native Sweden, this film was nominated for 5 Guldbagge Awards. I still am probably saying that wrong, but that's how I'm going to keep saying it. Guldbagge Awards. And it won prizes for Best Directing, Screenplay, and Cinematography, with additional awards going to production designer Eva Noren and Alfredson himself, who took home the prize for Best Director. So this movie cleaned up at essentially the Swedish Oscars.
Wow.
Guldbagge.
Did you look it up?
I just listened to someone say it.
I was saying it's similar to that. Guldbagge. I was close.
It's like Guldbagge. Yeah.
You got to have the accent, I think, is the thing. You got to say it with the accent for it to sound right. Guldbagge. Baga?
You've been eating too many grits, Justin. Too much grits.
Yeah. Too many grits.
Got your damn mouth full of grits.
So normally this is the part of the episode where I would ask, hey, what did you think of this movie? But it seems like both of you were very big fans of this. Gary, I know you've seen this before because I'm sure we've talked about it before. You've probably seen this a few times prior to this, right?
Yeah, I've seen this and the remake a few times. And because I legitimately do think it is one of the more memorable vampire movies available.
Yeah. I mean, it's so unique as a vampire movie. I mean, vampires, last year around Halloween, for like our 31 days of horror thing that we try to do, which we failed this year because there was a hurricane. But we try to do like a theme to it, whether it's like a franchise or in the case of last year, we did all vampire movies, and we watched this one because it's one of my absolute favorites. And watching it alongside all of those other vampire movies was really interesting. I think vampires are, of all the like classic movie monsters, they even more so than zombies, which I think would be in second place in this discussion. I think they are the most diverse as far as what you can do with a vampire, like what kind of story you can put them in, because there are things like Twilight, which is, for what it is, it's a young adult romance story or whatever. But then there's like Near Dark, which is very different, or the classic Dracula story, or even like the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula story, which does something totally unique, or vampires. What was it? Vampires in versus the Bronx. Is that what the name of it was? The one where the kids fight the vampires. Like,
oh yeah.
There's just all kinds of stuff you can do with a vampire movie, and there's so many things that have been done with vampire movies, but none of them are quite like this. Like, this is highly unique, even among vampire movies, which like I said, I think is one of the more diverse subgenres. Now, Todd, this was your first time watching this?
Yes, completely fresh, never seen a frame of it. Yeah, this was the first time viewing. Yeah.
Were you familiar or aware of it before this? You knew that it existed.
In that I knew that it existed, and I knew that it was two kids, the little girl's a vampire. That's about as much as I knew.
Okay.
And I knew there was a foreign film and an American remake and all that. But yeah, that's it. Years ago, I was really kind of into the vampire genre. In fact, my first, toe in the water in terms of creating, creative writing was a vampire story.
Oh yeah. Huh.
And it went over like a lead balloon when I turned it in for a class project while I was at Bob Jones. But that's a different story. Yeah, that's a different story. Yeah, and I really enjoyed sort of, beyond the surface level of the whole "I want to suck your blood," that whole thing. What does it mean to have these powers? Like, obviously there's some cool aspects to it, but there's a lot of drawbacks. What is living for centuries, what does that do to a person?
Psychologically.
Psychologically, like, how does that color their view of the world and relationships? And when it comes to something like this, where it's very coming of age, these two kids, surface level, they're at very volatile points in their life. I guess Ellie's more kind of always in a volatile point, but like Oscar, he's about to turn 13. He's still, really heavily bullied at school, and he's just kind of he's in that weird phase of his life where you're not a kid, but you're not a man. Like, I mean, there's a lot going on here. And then to throw in, God, maybe his first friendship, and it's this.
Yeah, he really doesn't seem to have a single friend at school.
Yeah. And it is a very, very fascinating look at all of these different aspects of the genre of this, particular movie monster, which at this point could easily fall into cliche or, hammy, schlocky, cheesy, what have you. This truly stands, it definitely stands amongst the best, but it also stands apart as something pretty unique and really beautiful.
Yeah, I saw one writer describe this as an anti-horror film. And I really like that distinction. I thought it was really interesting because, and this, a couple of the reviews, if you listen to our extended version of this on Cinema Shock Plus, more than one of those reviews kind of like were looking at this movie negatively because it didn't fit their expectations of what a horror movie should be. But just like I think that vampires as a monster are some of the more diverse ones out there because there's so much you can do with them. I think horror is also horror and sci-fi both are I think two of the most diverse genres. And I think horror even more so because horror can go in so many different ways. It can be fun, it can be gory, it can be legitimately attempting to be scary, but not every horror movie is attempting to be scary. Some of them are there for the thrills or even the visceral thrills, or some of them are just there to be silly and throw silly monsters at you and gore. Like, I wouldn't say that like Peter Jackson's Brain Dead or Dead Alive is not remotely trying to scare you. But would you call that anything other than a horror movie? Sure, a horror comedy, but that's just a subgenre within the horror genre. Yeah. Well, this is not a movie that set out to scare us or to creep us out. Even I don't think that's the goal of the movie. It's not even really out to provide like sensational violence and gore for the most part. What Let the Right One In is doing, I think, is using our cultural knowledge of vampires while avoiding a lot of the tropes associated with them. There are some, but it avoids a lot of them. It avoids the crucifix and the garlic and all that bullshit. But it uses things that we do know about vampires, because everyone knows what a vampire is. I mean, there's a vampire on fucking Sesame Street. Everybody knows what a vampire is from the time you're a child.
Yeah.
It's using that knowledge to tell a story rooted in human emotion. And this is, like, I think you even described it this way. This is a coming of age story. This is a character drama, and it is in its own way a romance. It's not a sexual romance. It's a pre-sex romance because these are adolescents who have not reached puberty yet. So it's like, which I think makes their relationship very interesting. I do think that there is a romantic aspect to the relationship, but it's not based in sex. It's based in human connection, which is ironic considering one of the two is not technically a human.
Yeah.
But you are curious about like the whole scene where they're laying in bed, you know, even like that, you perceive that's going to be like a sexual kind of scene, but it's not sexual.
It's not. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And neither of them even seem, as they hopefully should be, aren't aware of even that being an aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's not the basis of their relationship at all. And it is also a movie that I think is filled with real characters that the audience cares about. I think a big part of why this resonates with people is because these are characters who they don't feel like they were created just to be fodder for some sort of killer or monster like you get in a lot of horror movies, right? They're not the type of just stereotype that we're used to seeing in certain horror movies that feel less like people and more like hunks of meat ready for the grinder. Mm-hmm. And I don't just mean the main characters like Ellie and Oscar or even Håkan, but all the other residents of Blacksburg. I think that like the parents are deliberately made to have less characterization. Like you see what you need of them and you know enough about their relationship with Oscar that they essentially sort of ignore him a lot of the times. They're too busy for him with dealing with their own shit. But a lot of the other people in Blacksburg you actually spend more time with. The working class folks who we see hanging out at the Chinese restaurant like it's the local pub because maybe it's the closest thing to that apartment block where they all seem to live. Those people to me feel real, like they're having their conversations, their daily conversations. Like they feel like actual people who have lives that exist outside of the edges of the frame. Even though we don't spend a lot of time with them, we know enough about them to make them feel real so that when they do start to die, it has weight. And when they mourn the loss of their friend who dies, we understand it. We feel it. Like when Laka is just devastated over the death of his friend, like you understand why, because you've seen them hang out together. They look and they feel like real working class people who would have lived in this neighborhood in Sweden at the time. Yeah. You know, it's really well done, both from a writing and a directing standpoint. Just creating these characters who, you know, you don't want them to die. They have not done anything to deserve it. You know, whereas like if you have a slasher movie and some dumbass is acting like a dumbass and you're rooting for Jason to put a machete in his head, that doesn't happen here.
Yeah. I literally today before we recorded, I was watching Raiders of the Lost Ark and I was pointing out to Jennifer about how Spielberg like puts these like little things that happen in the movie that tells you something about the person, even if you don't realize he's telling you something about the person.
Yeah.
That will probably matter later.
Sure. Yeah.
And you accept it more because you're like, yeah, that's what he would do. And maybe even at the time, you don't realize why you think that's what he would do, but it's because you've been shown something that would. Anyway, that kind of, I don't know if it's because of stuff like this podcast that I notice stuff like that more, but exactly what you're saying about these guys hanging out at the Chinese restaurant. He shows you what you need to see to appreciate like who they are as people. And the same even goes for the parents, which have like the least role maybe in the film,
but you get enough.
You mentioned before, like, you know, the dad's got the boyfriend coming in or whatever, and this probably is the reason that they had a divorce. And you know, you can start to piece all of that shit together with like they gave you just enough that you're like, okay, I can kind of weigh out like what Oscar's life is,
right?
You know.
Yeah, his dad's been putting off some of their visits and things like that. You get a little bit of that, a hint of that between hearing the mom's conversation with the dad over the phone, and all you hear is her end, but you still context clues let you know that, hey, like he's canceled some of their visits that they're supposed to spend every other weekend or whatever, you know. It's good storytelling. It's efficient storytelling to where you're creating characters without having to explain everything about them, because we don't need to know everything about them. That's not part of the story. This is Ellie and Oscar's story. Maybe in the book they were fleshed out even more, but for the sake of the story that Alfredson's trying to tell here, he gives you exactly what you need. It's which is impressive, and it's something that not every director and every writer has the ability to do.
Maybe
And
even with the weird scar scene with Ellie, like it's like there's just a little bit of something else that like you just know there's like more, there's pain, there's like torture, there's something else has happened here.
Right, exactly. She's been through a traumatic event of some sort, and he's allowing the audience to figure that out on their own. He is trusting in the intelligence of the audience to figure that stuff out on their own. Now, Alfredson, he was never really a horror guy. He had never really made a horror film before this. He hasn't made one since either. He got his career started, like we said before, making TV comedies, and to this date, like the other movies that he's made I think 2, maybe 3 since then, and they've been in, like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is a spy movie, really good, by the way. And he made another. I'll talk about his other one later, but it was also a thriller that didn't go quite as well as the others. But he has stated in multiple interviews that I've read that he's like, I didn't watch any other vampire movies or even horror movies to prepare for this film because he didn't want that influence in his brain, and he didn't want to approach this like a vampire movie, which I think was really smart. And I think that this movie feels so unique within the horror genre and within the vampire subgenre because he was not trying to emulate what anyone else had done before. He was just trying to tell a story about these two people. One of them happens to be a vampire, but he wasn't like using those tropes that had become or were in danger of becoming cliche. He just ignored all those. He just did what was needed for this particular story. And I think by removing or at least not focusing on a lot of those tropes, he was able to shape your sympathies a little bit more with these characters because Ellie is essentially a monster. I mean, she is essentially not necessarily her fault, but she's been turned into a monster, right? Which is not necessarily sympathetic. She literally has to kill people to survive, but he's able to create a sympathetic character out of her to an extent. And traditionally, when we talk about all these vampire movies, I mean, vampires are a lot of times they're shown as like the cool monster, like the Cullens are rich and they live in a big cool house and they wear cool clothes and like everyone thinks that they're like the hot people at school and like you've got your Lestats, like vampires are seen as glamorous and cool and sexy, like all the way going back to Bela Lugosi. That's where that all started. Like, if you listen to our Nosferatu episode about this time last year, you know that those tropes were not in place back when that was made. But by the time Bela Lugosi came around in Todd Browning's movie, the vampire became like a sexy character. And that's kind of like what vampire, and there have been exceptions obviously here and there, but they've always been presented as sort of symbols of power. Like you watch a vampire movie and you're like, man, it would be kind of cool to be a vampire. Like it would be kind of cool. Like Lost Boys, like, party all night, stay up all night, sleep all day. Like it's like cool to be a vampire. But there's nothing appealing about Ellie's life in this movie. No. Like, there's nothing appealing about being a vampire in this world. Not only does her physical appearance turn the vampire trope on its head, because who could be afraid of a frail, little girl? That's not something you see very often outside of, I think you mentioned earlier, Interview with the Vampire. Yeah. Kirsten Dunst's character, but you don't see that a lot. But she's also shown as someone who has a sad, lonely, and very small life. It's very hard to imagine anyone like watching this and going like, oh man, it would be cool to be a vampire. Like, no, it's fucking sad. Like this, if this is what being a vampire is like this is very sad. This is depressing.
One thing I thought about this time around was like how all the animals seem to go ape shit anytime she's around. And I'm like, wow, you can't just like roam around.
Right.
Because like, dogs and cats or whatever are going to freak out if they see you. Somehow they sense that you're not right.
Well, you're another animal and you're a predator. Right. Yeah. So that's what they're sensing that.
Yeah.
Where do you guys think this stands? Like, we mentioned that this won all these awards, and I'll mention some more here in a minute, but in the scope of like horror or vampire movies, to you guys, like, where does this stand? Would you like, I at the beginning of this discussion, I called it, I think, one of the best vampire movies ever made at the beginning of this episode. And I stand by that. I do think it's one of the best vampire movies ever made. I think it's one of the best horror movies ever made. I think it's one of the best movies ever made. Like, I know that's saying a lot, but in the grand scheme of the millions, hundreds of thousands of movies that have been made, this is up there. Like, this deserves to be in like the Letterboxd top 250 or wherever it is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel weird saying like it's, in like the top 5 or 10 or something like that. But at the same time, like I struggle to find anything that I have a problem with that much with it. And I guess especially even with the setting, of where it is and at what time it is, it feels pretty spot on to me about life. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what you would change about it.
Yeah.
And
It's damn
so-
near perfect, honestly. If they just dialed up the quality of the CGI cats just a little bit, I think it would be a perfect
yeah.
film.
Okay, so maybe the cats. Maybe the cats.
And they're not. And honestly, watching it this time, they weren't as bad as I remembered.
Just the one on the leg. The one
They're
on the
still.
leg.
They're very clearly not there.
Yeah.
Like they're very, but it doesn't bother me. It doesn't take me out of the movie, really. Well,
Yeah.
maybe not now because I've seen this movie so many times and I'm expecting it that it doesn't take me out of the movie. And I think the scene overall is incredibly effective. I think that whole subplot with her is great.
Yeah.
The scene in the hospital where she bursts into flames,
Holy
it's
shit.
so good. It's such.
yeah.
It's like unlike and
Fantastic,
another
yeah.
thing that it's like how has no other vampire movie done something like this before?
Yeah.
Before 2008, vampire movies have been being made for 80 years at this point. Like, how has nobody done this before? And it seems so obvious. It's one of those things that seems so obvious that it's like it's brilliant. And the way he shoots it, like where she's center frame, flames hitting the ceiling, like it's
Gorgeous.
It's so well done. Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking at it, and I mean, besides that, I think I've waxed poetic enough about this movie. I'll try my best not to repeat myself. But one of the things that stood out to me was the idea of being presented this view of two big things: fear and love in a culture that is not my own.
I thought you were going into the Donnie Darko time. The line.
I actually thought about that. I was about to say I might sound like the lady from Donnie Darko here, but it was more of just kind of like looking at, and I've noticed that about foreign films, non-American films, when they're exploring some unique concepts or even just exploring the mundane day-to-day type aspects of life and culture. It's kind of a nice reminder of just like, you're not the center of the universe. There's other people around this, little blue marble that experience things differently. And, being able to see some of the things that do translate, the idea of feeling like an outsider, like Oscar, and feeling
universal.
Yeah, which is universal. And then, seeing, while I think we get the curtain pulled back on the life of a vampire, it's like, yeah, it's not glamorous. Not every vampire lives in a Victorian era mansion.
Right.
It's a very lonely, sad, dirty, depressing life. But then looking at the culture of the rest of the people it's like, oh, this is how this, there isn't a Walmart on the corner. There isn't, 500 channels, and sugary snacks to stuff in my face. It's, it's different. And it made me sort of kind of reevaluate and better appreciate what I have and where we are. And things aren't great here at this particular point in time. And by the time this is released, I'm sure they might change even more, maybe for better, maybe for worse. We'll see. But looking at the idea of the presentation of fear and how that manifests in a different culture, and the idea of love. And I say love, and again, we've stated it enough, but to repeat, not necessarily a sexual, lustful love, but a deep connection with someone else. How is that presented? How is that viewed in another culture? And I think that's, that's really important to see and experience, if at least through the eyes of, this particular filmmaker, through the lens of a vampire movie. Like, those are wonderful things to see and experience, on top of a gorgeous film, on top of a unique narrative. This checks so many boxes for me personally, and I absolutely love it. This has been one of the best films I've seen in a long time.
Todd, you made
that.
me feel so guilty for being so hard on Ellie earlier. Like because for some reason I am like, there's a part of me that, which I think generally is the larger part of me, is that wants to look at things positively and be like, this is what a cute movie. And, these two people care about each other.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that can't help thinking of it this time for whatever reason. Maybe I'm just in a cynical mindset of that. I'm like looking at this as like, there's the 200-year-old vampire who is smarter than a 12-year-old and has lived a 1,000 lives now, and has
well, that could also be that you have seen this movie so many times that you're looking for other angles to view it from too. And
it could be that. It could be that. Because I'll tell you another thing. Like, we, if you're not part of Cinema Shock X, you didn't hear us, or Cinema Shock Plus. X is a different thing. We'll introduce that later.
Yeah, that's later. That's where you see the actual biggest part of Gary.
There it is.
I appreciate that joke. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah. If you were part of Cinema Shock Plus, you didn't hear Somebody Needs a Nap, so you missed like some of this. But there was a discussion in there about there was a review that talked about it being transphobic or whatever. I did notice this time and looked it up just to see if I'm crazy, because I would never want to belittle or deny or disregard that interpretation completely. People that might have that viewpoint, because there is a weird situation with Ellie,
sure,
or a unique situation with Ellie, I should say. And it is interesting that early on in the movie, for the first like bit of the movie that you see her, she is wearing a sweater that is very much the trans flag colors. And I had never noticed that myself, and somebody pointed that out. And I'm like, wow, that is super interesting. I never noticed that. Is that a mistake, or not a mistake, or is that unintentional, or is it purposeful? And I don't know. And I don't know the answer to that, because I couldn't find anything where the director talked about it really.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting that that's a part of this too. I will say the aspect of it, being upset that it didn't dive further into that. I just don't think that story was getting to there. Like, you're already blowing fucking Oscar's mind. Like,
right.
Like he can't get into issues of gender and everything else. He's dealing with that as a vampire. And so not to, like I said, disregard that or anything. I just don't think the movie was trying to go further than these are two people that have a connection.
Yeah, and gender doesn't matter to either of them.
Exactly. I was about to say, I think that in a lot of ways, this is saying that like none of that even matters to them.
Yeah.
Like, she keeps asking, like, does it matter that I'm not a little girl, or, or I'm not a girl or whatever? And he's like, no. Does it make a difference? No. Like, there's those little parts of it, then it's just like, no, he just likes Ellie and Ellie likes him. And and it just is what it is. So I think that's as deep as it tries to go with this, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
And to tack on a little bit extra to that, when they even try to broach the subject of, well, let's go steady. Well, what do you want to do if we go steady? Nothing.
Nothing. Nothing says the same.
I don't
We
know.
just
Yeah,
say
is
we're going
anything
steady.
different? Is it just what we're doing now?
Yeah, it's what we're doing now.
Can we just do
Okay.
this forever?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I don't want to just keep on going and rant and rave about how much we love this movie forever, but just kind of almost in closing, I guess, at least in this discussion part, I do really think the word masterpiece gets thrown around a lot, but I think this is one of the movies that deserves that moniker. I think this is a hauntingly beautiful film. We keep calling it beautiful, which is not a term that you normally see applied to horror movies, but it is. It's a beautiful movie. I think we've all used that word to describe it at one point. It's beautiful not just visually, but emotionally as well, and that's part of why it works so well. Because by stripping the vampire movie of all of its glamour, Alfredson he's made a movie that appeals to more than just horror fans. This is a film whose story will appeal to anyone who's ever been bullied, or anyone who's ever been lonely, or anyone who's ever felt invisible, all those universal feelings that we were talking about, right? In the end, this isn't a horror story. It is, I would still put it in the horror genre, but it is a love story. It's a love story about two lonely people who find a connection, even if one of them happens to be a vampire. But what it's really about is two kids. And yes, I know Ellie is not technically a kid, but she is very lonely. She lives a very sad, lonely life, and she found someone else who also leads a sad, lonely life, and she tried to resist letting him into her life, but they had a connection. And sometimes, like, people just have a connection with another person.
You son of a bitch! That just made me think of Let the Right One In, and wow, you did it. Look at that. It goes both ways. It is.
I mean, well,
beautiful.
that is what there is a double meaning to that title. It's not just.
I didn't think of it till you just said that.
Glad I opened that door for you.
Thank you.
But I do think that is why the movie resonated and continues to resonate with audiences around the world, even folks who don't typically enjoy horror films. Because loneliness and the need for connection that's a universal need. Everybody needs to have somebody, right? It doesn't mean that everybody needs a sexual partner, because that's not what this movie is about, but they need human connection with another person. Yeah. And you need someone that you can relate to. And that's what these kids found in this movie. And I think very few films, horror or not, have managed to portray that need as well as this film does.
I do have one weird thing I saw in an interview with Alfredson that I want to run by you guys.
Okay.
So this was a written interview. So I don't know what his tone was. And the question before it was literally just about the relationship between Ellie and Oscar. And so this is an interesting thing that I had not thought about for any of it.
I think I know what this is, but go on.
So Alfredson answers the question about the relationship between Ellie and Oscar and says this, quote, "I think Ellie and Oscar are the same character. They are two sides of the same character. She is the mirror of him, all the things that he needs to be or wants to be. And the film also suggests that she is a fantasy in the end when she leaves. I don't know if that's your interpretation, but it suggests maybe she wasn't there at all. When he walks around her empty apartment, maybe she was just a fantasy. But then she comes back in the end. But I think that if you are bullied, the most common, if you see films about bullied children and they're very sad and they're very Jesus-like. But in this story, what is different is that all the violence he is confronted with, it becomes violence inside of him. And I would think that Ellie she is all the violence that is inside of him that needs to come out. He can't fight back because he's too weak or he's too scared. So she becomes all the violence inside of him, I think."
Yeah. So I read that same interview this morning. And I think it's really interesting because I think that I like that interpretation to an extent, because I like the idea that she is a personification of his rage, essentially. Because the very first thing we see Oscar doing in the movie is pretending that he's stabbing the bullies that are bullying him. So he's got a lot of rage in him. So it's interesting. I do think that it doesn't quite hold up with the movie itself because it doesn't explain how she's attacking the other people in the neighborhood.
That's a good point. Yeah.
You know, none of that involves Oscar. He's not there for any of that, so that doesn't really hold up plot wise. But I think you can view it both ways simultaneously. Honestly, I think it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like she's a reflection of his rage, and he's a reflection of her innocence lost.
Or
maybe?
that you could also think of him or think of Ellie as, remember the rage babies from The Brood when we talked about David Cronenberg? Like they were a literal physical manifestation of her rage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
the lady was just
so Ellie could have, be like a tulpa. Like she's like a tulpa for that was created by his inner rage. So she is physically there. She's not a figment of his imagination, but she was created by that. So you could view it that way as well.
that is a fucking weird way to view this.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing else to indicate that any of that is possible.
No, I agree.
But except that there's vampires.
I'm just going based on what he said and coming up with my own interpretation of it.
All I'd like to add to that is I was just going to say, to me, it could be just that as partners should do, they complement each other.
Yeah.
And I didn't take it as either of them doesn't exist or there's some weirder thing than a vampire thing.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I don't buy into his interpretation, but I see that he is the director. He created the film, but I wonder if that's something he thought about after the fact or something. I don't know, because in the film you see her kill people when Oscar's not there. Right. So
it is a fun thought exercise, but
yeah, it's fun. It's a fun portrayal. But I don't fully buy into that.
Hearing Todd talk about seeing it for the first time is really made me feel guilty for, but like you said, maybe I was just looking for other angles after having seen it a few times. But I'm like, all right, take it easy on Ellie. Like Ellie's been through a lot. She's done some centuries. Like
she's been mutilated.
Maybe she doesn't even realize how manipulative she is.
Yeah, that's true. Because she doesn't seem to relish in the like act of having to feed. Like she seems to sort of hate it, And nor does she like to kill, which is why she has Håkon out killing for her. But she just does it when we do see her do it in the film. It's out of necessity, with the exception of the final scene in the pool, which we haven't talked about somehow. The final scene.
I was going to say, it's like, it's easy. You look at the both of them and it's like maybe him handing her the Rubik's Cube or the silly little game about how many fingers am I using to tap you with right now. And all of that bullshit. It like helps her like come back into like being a kid or like, the innocence.
Yeah.
And then she can also look at his situation and be like, oh, you don't know how to chop a motherfucker's head off. Let me that's easy for me.
Yeah. I got
show you what that's like.
That scene is so satisfying, honestly, though. Because there's one thing in movies one trope in movies that like I hate seeing people bullied in real life and in movies. I just hate seeing people bullied.
Right.
It's one of those tropes. Like it's maybe one reason that I like Stephen King stuff so much, because he always has bullies in his movies or books and movies, and they almost always, they're like the worst type of bullies. Like they are terrible, as are the ones in this.
I was going to say like these.
The ones in this movie these bullies are very much Stephen King style bullies. Like they're just sadistic and mean for the sake of being mean. But like in a lot of Stephen King stories, they get what's coming to them and then some. And there's something just very, now I'm not saying that I want, like, I think kids who bully other kids should be ripped limb from limb, but
there's saying, if you're bullied at school,
hire you a vampire. But there is something very satisfying about seeing someone who is constantly abusing someone else just because they can get taken down a notch. And by get taken down a notch, I mean get their heads
like limbs removed.
Yeah, geez Louise.
But it's such a great scene the way it's shot, where the whole thing is underwater. The way that he shoots it all from Oscar's perspective is odd. And then you get that one wide shot where you see the mayhem and you see the body parts and everything. It's so good. It's such a good scene.
And then she leaves the one the one crying kid alive, like,
because he's the only one that showed any sort of like real remorse. I mean, the one kid sort of showed remorse or some at least hesitancy throughout, but he's also the one that got Oscar into that pool. So she's like, that's one step too far, my friend.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think he's the one who gets his head ripped off.
Yeah. No, it's wild, and it's a good testament too, by the way, to just good filmmaking that you don't need to see the act. Like,
no, it's better that you don't. Like when you see that somebody's feet going through the water in the background out of focus, you're like, whoa, what the fuck? Like that's way more effective than if you had seen whatever she's doing, because your imagination can imagine so much more than what you would actually see. And then you see that moment where the one arm just that's holding onto his head.
It just falls. Like, oh shit.
It's so much better than seeing it ripped off.
It made me think of Jaws, where just kind of like a lot of the violence and stuff was taking place off screen, but somehow that made it more. It made it more. It's oh man, it's cool. And yeah, really, really well done. I have one other aspect of Ellie, and again, this was early on, that kind of, and again, maybe this is more the psychological aspect of it, but just such a bit of dialogue to sort of encapsulate it is Oscar looks at Ellie and says, aren't you cold? And she says something to the effect of, I guess I forgot how. Yeah. I've forgotten how. And I'm like, wow, that is incredible.
Good line.
Yeah, it's a great line. The last thing, and I found this in my reading, I don't know if this came up for you guys, but Oscar and Ellie learn Morse code. And when they're there on the train, and it's, slowly panning back to finally reveal the box, kind of at his feet, there's a tapping, and then he taps back. What is tapped to him is KISS, and he taps back KISS. And I was just like, wow. It's it's a fun little detail, just to kind of show like this connection between these two people. Anyway, sorry.
no, I thought that was super sweet too. And know, it's interesting because I've had like the cynical view of it, and like, oh well, here this guy is doomed to the same fate that last guy is doomed to. Which is why I'm glad they left out the pedophile thing. Just because you could just picture that, like, what if Ellie met what's his face, like when he was a little kid, and he grew up with her, and he got too old, and he's getting rusty, and and then it's time to move on.
In the American remake, that's more explicit. Like they show a picture of Ellie, or it's Abby in that version, and Thomas, I think is his name in this one. They show a picture of them together as kids. Where she looks the same. So it's very explicitly, they don't say it out loud, but they literally show a picture of the two of them as children towards the end of the movie. So that one, they're definitely like letting you know, hey, he's been with her since he was her age, or, presumably.
Well, because it feeds into the more cynical view of like that. If you're just like, oh, Ellie would even use a pedophile. It's like, all right, cool. Come along with
because
me.
she's got that power over him, because
this is my very last thing, I swear to God, and a bit of a hot take as a Batman fan. I think the prosthetics of the dude with half of his face melted off better than Dark Knight. I think it's better than how they did Two-Face.
I would not. I don't think that's a hot take. I would agree with that.
It looked great. It looked
fantastic.
It's more realistic.
Yeah.
As far as what would happen if acid were actually thrown on your face. And in the American remake, I think it's even more realistic, because like his nose is gone. Like it's pretty grotesque in that one. So since I've mentioned it a couple of times here recently, so when Let the Right One In, it was very popular, obviously. So this led to an English language remake released just 2 years later in 2010.
Which is quick.
which is very quick for a remake. Yeah. And the American British co-production titled Let Me In was written and directed by Matt Reeves, who directed the Batman. So
Yes,
there's another
yes, he did.
another Batman connection for you. It starred Chloe Grace Moritz and Cody Smith-Fee as the film's lead. Abby and Owen is his name in it. And Richard Jenkins is who plays the caretaker, Thomas, Abby's adult caretaker. And Richard Jenkins is always he's just one of my favorite character actors. He's
great,
and he's really good in this movie. You've seen Let Me In a few times, you said, right, Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And Richard Jenkins will never be better than he is in Cabin in the Woods. But,
that's what's great about Richard Jenkins is that he can play a character as sad and pathetic as the character in Let the Right One or in Let Me In, and then be absolutely hilarious in Cabin in the Woods. He's great, and in Step Brothers. He's so funny in Step Brothers. I love that guy. And then in 2013. A playwright by the name of Jack Thorne adapted Let the Right One In into a stage play. I didn't know anything about this till I started looking into this. This debuted at the Royal Court Theatre in November of that year in London. And it made its New York debut at St. Anne's Warehouse in Brooklyn in January of 2015. Very well received. I would like to see it. I think it'd be cool. I wish somebody local, like the Warehouse Theatre here in Greenville, I wish someone like that would do it. I think that would be really cool.
God, that'd be cool.
In 2022, there was actually another adaptation of Lindqvist's book released, this time on television. Did you guys know about this?
I remember when this got announced, and I was like, weirdly enough, I remember when this got announced, and I was like, surely it's not like a remake of Let the Right One In, like the Let the Right One In. I was like, there was already a version that a lot of people know, and then a remake of that version.
Yeah.
They're not doing a TV series about it.
They did. It was originally developed for TNT, and then it moved to Showtime, where it was eventually released. The series starred Damian Bashir as a character named Mark Kane, who was kind of the show's version of the Hawkins/Thomas character, like the caretaker. Damian Bashir is a fantastic actor. He's really great. But in this version, his vampire companion, the girl, is his daughter, like his actual daughter. Who was turned into a vampire 10 years before the film started. So he's like taking care of her. He's been kind of her caretaker since then. So that kind of adds a whole nother layer, which is really interesting to me. And then I think they're in New York. They travel around, but then they kind of settle in New York at the beginning of the series. I haven't seen it. This is just from what I've read about it. And then she meets a 12-year-old boy and befriends him there. So it seems to take some liberties with the source material, but using the concept of the source material as a kind of a starting point. It did receive pretty decent reviews when it came out, but it didn't get very good ratings, and it ended up getting canceled after a single season. But it's on Showtime, so I've got Showtime. Well, I was going to
say, does it at least wrap up the story at all?
I don't know, but I'm kind of curious about it. I kind of want to go watch it just to see. Well, in the year since its release, Let the Right One In has come to be considered one of the greatest horror movies ever made. When Bloody Disgusting released their list of best horror films of the decade in 2010, Let the Right One In took the top spot. It was their number one horror film of the decade. Nice. On Empire Magazine's 2010 list of the 100 best films of world cinema, Let the Right One In was ranked at number 15, which is very high, considering, that wasn't based on a time period. That's just based on movies all over the world. And Empire's based in England, so I assume they were doing non-England or America-based films. Mm-hmm. In an international critics poll conducted by the BBC, the film was voted the 94th greatest film since 2000. And when Time Out conducted a poll with writers, directors, actors, and critics who worked in the horror genre, Let the Right One In placed at number 28 in their list of top 100 horror films. So the movie's gotten, and that's just a small inkling of the accolades that it's received. Go look at the awards section of its Wikipedia entry, just for all the things that it won or was nominated for. It's sort of insane. As for Alfredson, the film's success opened up a lot of doors for the director, leading to offers outside of Sweden that, as we mentioned earlier, led to his English language debut with Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, an adaptation of the John le Carre novel of the same name. It's really good. I definitely recommend it. It's got a great performance by Gary Oldman in it. That
Yes.
film was a box office success. It did pretty well, and like Let the Right One In, it was nominated for and won several awards, including the award for Outstanding British Film at the British Academy Film Awards. The same could not be said for Alfredson's follow-up to that film, which is called The Snowman. Released in 2017, this is it's a psychological thriller based on the 2007 novel by Joe Nesbo. It boasts a pretty impressive cast that includes Michael Fassbender, Rebecca Ferguson, Val Kilmer, and J.K. Simmons, which unfortunately did not help it very much with critics or audiences. The film was not only a box office disappointment, but it was a critical disaster. You know, I talked about how earlier, I don't take a lot of stock in Rotten Tomatoes, except that, Let the Right One In was at 98%. When something is that successful and 98% of people say it's good, it's probably pretty good. The Snowman's at 7% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, which
Quite
is
a drop off.
Which is bad. Probably doesn't help that Michael Fassbender's character. Great. Okay, so this is based on a novel by I think he's Norwegian, I think, Joe Nesbo. It's a whole series of novels he has starring the same character. So maybe something is lost in translation from that language to English. But Michael Fassbender's character, who is the main character of this entire series, his name is Harry Hole, which I don't probably didn't help its status here in America, because everyone saw that name. And just like you guys just did, just could not giggle at it.
Yeah.
His name is. You can't take a detective seriously if his name is Detective Harry Hole.
Oh, it is a detective.
Yeah, I just googled it. The Harry Hole.
Dick
series.
Harry Hole.
Harry Hole. What? The Harry Hole series of novels. Yep. I have not seen The Snowman because I heard it was very bad, so I didn't bother.
God.
But I don't think he's done a movie since then. He might still be doing stage stuff. He's done, he does a lot of stage stuff or even stuff in television. I don't think he's done a movie since 2017 though. Lindqvist, on the other hand, in the year since the release of his debut novel, he's published 4 additional novels, including a zombie story, which I would really like to read because his take on the vampire story is so unique. I'd like to read his take on a zombie story. He's done a ton of short stories as well, although from what I can tell, none of the novels nor the short stories have been successfully adapted into the film, although I am sure that attempts have been made, especially with the zombie movie, because I think the zombie book came out right after this one. I think that was his follow-up to this. So I'm sure somebody saw dollar signs in their eyes, but nothing's ever come of it. So, but we'll always have Let the Right One In regardless. I hope that, Alfredson, I'd like to see him return to something like this, but, he was never a horror movie guy. He just saw something in this story. Whereas Lindqvist, I think, has leaned more into the horror thing, doing a zombie movie right after it, or a zombie book right after his vampire book. But we'll see what happens from here on. But we'll always have this movie, and even if Alfredson never makes another big hit like this, he still managed to create one of the best horror movies ever made. So that's got to stand for something.
Yeah.
You guys want to talk about what we're doing next?
Yeah, we might as well.
Might as well let people know. So we had grand plans to end 2024 on a on a series that was originally going to be like 8 episodes long, where we were going to do like all movies from 1999 that were celebrating their 25th anniversary this year, or at least ones we haven't talked about, like Fight Club and The Matrix and stuff. We've already talked about some of the big ones, but some of the ones that wouldn't get their own series that would be good, like almost like roulette episodes, standalones, we wanted to talk about some of those, but because of the hurricane and various other things, our schedule got kind of out of whack. So now we've only got room to do like maybe 3 of those before the end of the year. But we're still going to do a few of them because we think it'd be fun. It's not going to be as epic as we had originally envisioned, but we've got 3 very different movies from 1999 that are celebrating their 25th anniversary this year, or have already celebrated their 25th anniversary, that I think are going to be fun. They're all from different genres. And we are starting with one that is actually one of the very few animated films that we've ever discussed. What have we done? Heavy Metal? Have we done any other animated movies besides Heavy Metal?
I don't think so.
Is that the only one?
It might be.
The Animatrix. Like
we talked about Animatrix.
Yeah, that was kind of a bonus episode, but we did do that. But yeah, we haven't talked about a lot of animation. I mean, the behind the scenes stories on animated films are a little different. It's a very different production. But the one that we're talking about on our next episode is going to have a cool story behind it from 1999, directed by Brad Bird. Honestly, this was Todd's pick. We all picked one movie from 1999 to talk about. This was Todd's pick. I thought he was going to pick Galaxy Quest, but I think he's saving that for his own fucking podcast. So
you've seen through me, Justin.
He didn't want to blow his load on Galaxy Quest here on Cinema Shock. He's saving that for his own, but maybe it's still on the roulette wheel, so it could still come up here, and you'll have to do it.
Wow.
But anyway, we're talking about The Iron Giant, one of the most underrated animated films of all time, I think.
It's really great.
It's really great. So I'm excited to talk about it. We're going to talk about the whole story behind the Iron Giant on our next episode. Should we tell people what the other ones are going to be, or just reveal them as we go?
Let's reveal them as we go.
All right, let's do that. So listen to Iron Giant if you want to know what's following that one up. That'll be on our next episode here in a couple of weeks. What else? Housekeeping items. We'll remind you once again, please join Cinema Shock Plus. If you want to support the show, you'll get those extended episodes, including all those, those bonus segments that we've talked about. Go to cinemashock.net for all the stuff, all the episodes, the merch, the link to our Discord, events. We've got another event coming up on November 19th, which will be right after this episode drops. So if you're listening to this on release day, you've still got time to get tickets. We are showing Dolomite at Coffee Underground here with our friends at Gut Punch Cinema in Greenville, South Carolina.
The name. Fucking up motherfuckers is my game.
Yep, Todd's seen the movie. So we're going to talk about Dolomite. Yeah. We're going to introduce it at Coffee Underground in the theater downstairs there. The three of us, I think we'll all three be there. And then we're just going to show the movie. And then we're going to hang out afterwards at the bar across the street. So that'll be fun. And you can go to cinemashock.net, click on events, and you can find link to tickets and stuff on there. You guys want to tell the listeners where you can be found on the internet?
Yeah, I am at This Is Gary Horn on all the social media. I also work for the National Wrestling Alliance. If you want to be a part of that, or you want to get into wrestling, or you just like wrestling in general, you can catch all of our episodes right now randomly on X.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, you can watch that right now. So at NWA, you can watch all of this.
So full episodes are on there.
Full episodes are on X.
That's cool. Wow. Are they still on YouTube or just on X?
Just on X right now.
Just exclusively on X. Interesting.
Our owner did not want to do YouTube anymore. He decided he wanted to do X. So
okay.
There we are.
All right. There we are.
If you love stand-up comedy or Dungeons and Dragons, I host a monthly comedy show at Not Just Gaming, a comic book and game shop in downtown Greer, South Carolina. And at the same location, I host an actual play show called D's 20, where comedians and drag performers play Dungeons and Dragons live in front of an audience. My show, Computer Resume Podcast, covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order, is available everywhere and at Computer Resume on all the socials and Patreon. And I'm at Mr. Toddy Davis on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
I am at Justin_Bishop on all the social media. The podcast is at Cinema_Shock. You can also find us on Facebook. And once again, at cinemashock.net or cinemashock.net/plus if you're nasty. And until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys.
You couldn't think of a line from this movie? I know. How do you say Johnny has the keys in